I only have a little bit of time before work, so I'm going to try to knock out some John Milton Book 1, Paradise Lost. Hope you enjoy it. Like, subscribe, share, leave me a comment in the comment section. Um, Love his note on the verse about why he's not utilizing rhyme for his poem. Uh, John Milton, Paradise Lost, his note on the verse, then we'll get into the Book 1 summation and then into Book 1. Here we go. The verse. The measure is English heroic verse without rhyme, is that of Homer in Greek and Virgil in Latin, rhyme being no necessary adjunct or true ornament of poem or good verse, in longer works especially, but the invention of a barbarous age to set off wretched matter and lame metre, graced indeed since by the use of some famous modern poets carried away by custom, but much of their own vexation, hindrance, and constraint to express many things otherwise, and for the most part worse than else they would have expressed them. Not without cause, therefore, some both Italian and Spanish poets of prime note have rejected rhyme both in longer and shorter works, as have also since our best English tragedies as a thing of itself, to all judicious ears trivial, and no true musical delight, which consists only in apt numbers, fit quantity of syllables, and sense variously drawn out from one verse into another, not in the jingling sound of like endings, a fault avoided by the learned ancients, both in poetry and all good oratory. This neglect, then, of rhyme so little is to be taken for a defect, though it may seem so perhaps to vulgar readers, that it rather is to be esteemed an example set, the first in English of ancient liberty recovered to heroic poem from the troublesome modern bondage of rhyming. Book 1, The Argument. This first book proposes first in the brief the whole subject. This first book proposes first in brief the whole subject, man's disobedience, and the loss thereupon of paradise wherein he was placed. Then touches the prime cause of his fall, the serpent, or rather Satan in the serpent, who, revolting from God, and drawing to his side many legions of angels, was by the command of God driven out of heaven with all his crew into the great deep, which action passed over. The poem hastes into the midst of things, presenting Satan with his angels now fallen into hell, described here not in the center, for heaven and earth may be supposed as yet not made, certainly not yet accursed, but in a place of utter darkness. Fitly is called chaos. Here Satan and his angels lying on the burning lake, thunderstruck and astonished, after a certain space recovers, as from confusion calls upon him who next in order and dignity lay by him they confer of their miserable fall. Satan awakens all his legions, who lay till then in the same manner confounded. They rise, their numbers array of battle, their chief leaders, their numbers array of battle, their chief leaders named according to the idols known afterwards in Canaan and countries adjoining. To these Satan directs his speech, comforts them with hope, yet of regaining heaven, but tells them lastly of a new world, a new kind of creature to be created, according to an ancient prophecy, to report in heaven, for that angels were long before this visible creation, was the opinion of many ancient fathers. To find out the truth of his prophecy, and what to determine thereon, he refers to a full council. What his associates then attempt, Pandemonium, the palace of Satan rises, suddenly built out of the deep. The infernal peers there sit in council. So, I may have some difficulty pronouncing like the various names of the demons and everything, but we'll get through it. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe, with loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seat. Sing heavenly muse, that on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai didst inspire that shepherd who first taught the chosen seed. In the beginning how the heavens and earth rose out of chaos, or of Sion hill, delight thee more in Siloa's brook that flowed. Fast by the oracle of God I thence invoke thy aid to my adventurous song, that with no middle flight intends to soar above the Ionian mount, while it pursues things unattempted yet in prose and rhyme, And chiefly thou, O Spirit, that dost prefer before all temples the upright heart and pure, instruct me, for thou knowest, thou from the first wast present, and with mighty wings outspread, dove-like, satst brooding on the vast abyss, and madest it pregnant. What in me is dark illumine, what is low raise and support, that to the height of this great argument I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men. Say first, for heaven hides nothing from thy view, nor the deep tract of hell. Say first, what cause moved our grandparents in that happy state, favored of heaven, so highly fall off from their Creator and transgress his will, for one restraint lords of world besides. Who first seduced them to that foul revolt? The infernal serpent, he it was, whose guile stirred up with envy and revenge, deceived the mother of mankind. What time his pride had cast him out from heaven, with all his host of rebel angels, by whose aid aspiring to set himself in glory above his peers. He trusted to have equalled the Most High if he opposed, with the ambitious aim, against the throne and monarchy of God. Raised impious war in heaven, battle proud with vain attempt, him the almighty power hurled headlong, flaming from the ethereal sky with hideous ruin, and combustion down to bottomless perdition, there to dwell in adamantine chains and penal fire. Who durst defy the omnipotent to arms, 9 times the space that measures day and night to mortal men, he with his horrid crew lay vanquished, rolling in fiery gulf, confounded, though immortal. But his doom reserved him to more wrath, for now the thought both of lost happiness and lasting pain torments him. Round he throws his baleful eyes that witnessed huge affliction and dismay, mixed with obdurate pride and steadfast hate. At once, as far as angels can, he views the dismal situation, waste and wild, a dungeon horrible on all sides round, as one great furnace flamed, yet with those flames no light, but rather darkness visible, served only to discover sights of woe, regions of sorrow, doleful shades where peace and rest can never dwell. Hope never comes that comes to all, but torture without end still urges, and fire and a fiery deluge fed, with ever burning sulphur unconsumed. Such place eternal justice had prepared for those rebellious here, their prison ordained in utter darkness, and their portion set as far removed from God and light of heaven, as from the centre thrice to the utmost pole. Oh, how unlike the place from whence they fell! There the companions of his fall, overwhelmed with floods and whirlwinds of tempestuous fire, he soon discerns it, and weltering by his side one next himself in power, and next in crime, long after known in Palestine and named Beelzebub, to whom the arch enemy, and thence in heaven called Satan, with bold words breaking the horrible silence, thus began: If thou beest he, oh how fallen, how changed! From him, who in the happy realms of light, clothed with transcendent brightness, didst outshine myriads, though bright. If he whom mutual league, united thoughts and counsels, equal hope and hazard, and the glorious enterprise joined with me, once now misery hath joined in equal ruin, into what pit thou seest, from what height fallen, so much the stronger proved he with his thunder, till then who knew the force of those dire arms. Yet not for those, nor what the potent victor in his rage can else inflict, do I repent or change. Though changed in outward lustre, the fixed mind in high disdain from sense of injured merit, that with the mightiest raised me to contend, and to the fierce contention brought along innumerable force of spirits armed, that durst dislike his reign, and me preferring his utmost power with adverse power opposed, in dubious battle on the plains of heaven, and shook his throne. What though the field be lost? All is not lost. The unconquerable will, the study of revenge, immortal hate, and courage never to submit or yield, and what is else not to be overcome, that glory never shall his wrath or might extort from me, to bow and sue for grace with suppliant knee, and deify his power, who from the terror of his arm so late doubted his empire, that were low indeed, that were an ignominy, 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 Man. Ah. That's embarrassing. And shame beneath this downfall, since by fate and strength of gods and this imperial substance cannot fail, since through experience of this great event in arms not worse and foresight much advanced, we may with more successful hope resolve to wage by force or guile eternal war irreconcilable to our grand foe, who now triumphs in the excess of joy. Sole reigning holds the tyranny of heaven. So spake the apostate angel, though in pain, vaunting aloud, but racked with deep despair, and him thus answered soon to his bold compeer: O Prince, O Chief of many throned powers, that led the embattled seraphim to war, under thy conduct in dreadful deeds, fearless endangered heaven's perpetual king, and put to proof his high supremacy, whether upheld by strength or chance or fate, too well I see and rue the dire event, that with sad overthrow and foul defeat hath lost us heaven, and all this mighty host in horrible destruction laid thus low, as far as gods and heavenly essences can perish. For the mind and spirit remains invincible, and the vigor soon returns. Though all our glory extinct and happy state here swallowed up in endless misery, but what if he, our conqueror, whom I know of force believe almighty, since no less than such could have overpowered such force as ours, have left us, this our spirit and strength entire, strongly to suffer and support our pains, that we may so suffice his vengeful ire, or do him mightier service as his thralls by right of war, whatever his business be, here in the heart of hell to work and fire, or do his errands in the gloomy deep. What can it then avail, though yet we feel strength undiminished, or eternal being to undergo eternal punishment? Whereto with speedy words the arch-fiend replied: Fallen cherub, to be weak is miserable during our suffering, but of this be sure, to do aught good never will be our task. To do aught good will never be our task. To do anything good will never be our task. But ever to do ill our sole delight, as being the contrary to his high will, whom we resist, then his providence out of our evil seek to bring forth good. Our labor must be to pervert that end, and out of good still to find means of evil, which oft times may succeed so as perhaps shall grieve him, if I fail not, and disturb his inmost counsels from their destined aim. But see, the angry victor hath recalled his ministers of vengeance and pursuit back to the gates of heaven. The sulphurous hail, shot after us in storm, overblown, hath laid the fiery surge, that from the precipice of heaven received us falling, and the thunder winged with red lightning and impetuous rage, perhaps hath spent his shafts, and ceases now to bellow through the vast and boundless deep. Let us not slip the occasion, whether scorn or satiate fury, yielded from our foe. Seest thou yon dreary plain, forlorn and wild, the seat of desolation, void of light, save what the glimmering of these livid flames cast pale and dreadful? Thither let us tend, from off the tossing of these fiery waves their rest, if any rest can harbor there, resembling our afflicted powers. Consult how we may henceforth most defend our enemy, our own loss how repair, how overcome this dire calamity, what reinforcement we may gain from hope, if not, what resolution from despair. Thus Satan, talking to his nearest mate, with head uplift above the wave and eyes that sparkling blazed, his other parts besides prone on the flood, extended long and large, lay floating, many a rude in bulk as huge as whom the fables name of monstrous size, Titanian and earthborn, that warred on Jove, Briareus, or Typhon, from the den by ancient Tarsus held, or that sea beast Leviathan, which God of all his works created hugest, and swim the ocean stream, him haply slumbering on the Norway foam, the pilot to some small night-foundered skiff, deeming some island oft, as seamen tell, with fixed anchor in his scaly rind, moors by his side under the lee, while night invests the sea, and wished morn delays, so stretched out huge in length the arch-fiend lay chained on the burning lake, nor ever thence had risen, or heaved his head, but that the will and high permission of all ruling heaven, left him at large to his own dark designs, that with reiterated crimes he might heap on himself damnation, while he sought evil to others, and enraged might see how all his malice served but to bring forth infinite goodness, grace, and mercy shown on man by him seduced, but on himself treble confusion, wrath and vengeance poured forthwith. Upright he rears from off the pool his mighty stature. On each hand the flames driven backward slope their pointing spires, and rolled in billows leagued amidst a horrid veil. Then with expanded wings he steers his flight aloft, incumbent on the dusky air that felt unusual weight, till on dry land he lights. If it were land that ever burned with solid as the lake with liquid fire, and such appeared in hue as when the force of subterranean wind transports a hill torn from Pelorus, or the shattered side of thundering Etna, whose combustible and fueled entrails, thence conceiving fire sublimed with mineral fury, aid the winds and leave a singed bottom all involved with stench and smoke. Such resting found in soul of unblessed feet, him followed his next mate, both glorifying to have escaped the Stygian flood as gods, and by their own recovered strength, not by the sufferance of supernal power. Is this the region, this soil, the clime? Said then the lost archangel, this the seat that we must change for heaven, this mournful gloom for that celestial light? Be it so, since he who now is sovereign can dispose and bid what shall be right farthest from him is best, whom reason hath equalled, force hath made supreme above his equals. Farewell, happy fields, where joy forever dwells. Hail, horrors! Hail, infernal world! Thou profoundest hell, receive thy new possessor, one who brings a mind to be changed by place or time. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. What matter where, if I be still the same? What I should be, all but less than he whom thunder hath made greater. Here at least we shall be free. The Almighty hath not built. Here, for his envy, will not drive us hence. Here we may reign secure, and in my choice to reign is worth ambition, though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. But wherefore, let we then, our faithful friends, the associates and co-partners of our loss, lie thus astonished on the oblivious pool, and call them not to share with us their part in this unhappy mansion, or once more with rallied arms to try what may what may be yet regained in heaven, and what more lost in hell. So Satan spake, and him Beelzebub thus answered, leader of those armies bright, which but the omnipotent none could have foiled, if once they hear that voice, their liveliest pledge of hope and fears and dangers heard so oft, in worst extremes and on the perilous edge of battle when it raged in all assaults, their surest signal they will soon resume new courage and revive, though now they lie groveling and prostrate on yon lake of fire, as we erewhile, astounded and amazed, no wonder fallen such a pernicious height. He scarce had ceased when the superior fiend was moving toward the shore, his ponderous shield, ethereal temper massy, large, and round behind him cast. The broad circumference hung on his shoulders like the moon, whose orb through optic glass the Tuscan artist views at evening from the top of Faisal, or in Valdarno, to descry new lands, rivers or mountains, in our spotty globe. His spear to equal, which the tallest pine hewn on Norwegian hills to be the mast of some great admiral, but a wand he walked to support uneasy steps over burning marl, not like those steps on heaven's azure, and their torrid climb smote on him sore, besides vaulted with fire. Nathless he so endured, till on the beach of that inflamed sea he stood and called his legions angel forms, and lay entranced, thick as autumnal leaves that strew the brooks in Vallombrosa, where the Etrurian shades high overarched embower scattered sedge afloat, When the fierce winds Orion armed hath vexed the Red Sea coast, whose wave overthrew Busiris and Memphian chivalry, while the perfidious hatred they pursued the sojourners of Goshen, who beheld from the safe shore their floating carcasses, and broken chariot wheels, so thick bestrown, abject and lost, lay these covering the flood under amazement of their hideous change. He called so loud that all the hollow deep of hell resounded. Princes, potentates, warriors, and flower of heaven, once yours, now lost, if such astonishment as this can seize eternal spirits, and have ye chosen this place after the toil of battle to repose your wearied virtue for the ease you find to slumber here, as in the vales of heaven, or in this abject posture, have ye sworn to adore the conqueror, who now beholds cherub and seraph rolling in the flood with scattered arms and ensigns, till anon his swift pursuers from heaven gates discern the advantage in descending, tread down, thus drooping, or with linked thunderbolts transfix us to the bottom of this gulf. Awake, arise, or be forever fallen. They heard, and they were abashed, and up they sprung, upon the wing, as when men wont to watch on duty sleeping found, by whom they dread, rouse, and bestir themselves ere well awake. Nor did they not perceive the evil plight in which they were, or the fierce pains not feel, yet to their general's voice they soon obeyed innumerable. And when the potent rod of Amram's son in Egypt's evil day waved round the coast, upcalled a pitchy cloud of locusts, warping on the eastern wind, that o'er the realm of impious Pharaoh hung like night, and darkened all the land of Nile. So numberless were those bad angels seen hovering on the wing under the cope of hell, twixt upper nether and surrounding fires, till, as a signal given, the uplifted spear of their great sultan waving to direct their course, in even balance down they light on the firm brimstone, fill all the plain, a multitude like which the populous north poured never from their frozen loins to pass rain or Danaw, when her barbarous sons came like a deluge on the south, and spread beneath Gibraltar to the Libyan sands. Forthwith from every squadron and each band the heads and leaders thither haste, where stood their great commander, godlike shapes and forms, excelling human princely dignities, and powers that erst in heaven sat on thrones, though of their names and heavenly records now be no memorial blotted out and razed by their rebellion from the books of life. Nor had they yet among the sons of Eve got them new names till wandering o'er the earth, through God's high sufferance for the trial of man, by falsities and lies the greatest part of mankind they corrupted forsake. God their Creator and the invisible glory to him, and made them to transform oft the image of a brute adorned with gay religions full of pomp and gold, and devils to adore for deities. Then were they known to men by various names and various idols through the heathen world. Say muse their names, then known, who first, who last, roused from the slumber on that fiery couch. At their great emperor's call, as next in worth came singly, where he stood on the bare strand, while the promiscuous crowd stood yet aloof. The chief were those who, from the pit of hell roaming to seek their prey on earth, durst fix their seats, long after next to the seat of God, their altars by his altar. Gods adored among the nations round, and durst abide Jehovah thundering out of Sion, throned between the cherubim, yea, often placed within his sanctuary itself, their shrines. Abominations, and with cursed things, his holy rites and solemn feasts profaned, and with their darkness durst affront his light. First Moloch, horrid king besmeared with blood, of human sacrifice and parents' tears, though the noise of drums and timbrels loud, their children's cries unheard, and passed through fire to his grim idol, him, the Ammonite, worshipped in Rabbah and her watery plain, in Argob and in Basan, to the stream of utmost Arnon. Nor content with such audacious neighborhood, the wisest heart of Solomon he led by fraud to build his temple right against the temple of God on that opprobrious hill, and made his grove the pleasant valley of Hinnom, Tophet thence, and black Gehenna, called the type of hell, next Chamos, the obscene dread of Moab's sons, from Orior to Nebo, and the wild of southmost Abarim, and Hesabon, and Horonaim, Seon's realm behind the flowery dale of Sibmah, clad with vines, and Elieleh, the asphaltic pool, Peor, his other name, when he enticed Israel in Sittim on their march from Nile to do him wanton rites which cost them woe. Yet thence his lustful orgies, he enlarged even to the hill of scandal by the grove of Moloch homicide, lust hard by hate, till good Josiah drove him thence to hell. With these came they who from their bordering flood of old Euphrates to the brook that parts Egypt from the Syrian ground had general names of Baalim and Ashtaroth, those male, those feminine, for spirits when they please can either sex assume, or both, so soft and uncompounded, in their essence pure, not tied or manacled with joint or limb, nor founded on the brittle strength of bones like cumbrous flesh, but in what shape they chose, dilated or condensed, bright or obscure, can execute their airy purposes, and works of love or enmity fulfill. For those of race of Israel oft forsook their living strength, and unfrequented left his righteous altar, bowing lowly down to bestial gods, for which their heads as low bowed down at battle, sunk before the spear of despicable foes. With these in troop came Astoreth, whom the Phoenicians called Astarte, queen of heaven, with crescent horns, to those bright image nightly by the moon. Sidonian virgins paid their vows and songs in Sion, also not unsung, where stood her temple in the offensive mountain, built by the uxorious king, whose heart, though large, beguiled by fair idolatresses, fell to idols foul. Thammuz came next behind, whose annual wound in Lebanon allured the Syrian damsels to lament his fate, in amorous ditties all the summer's day, while smooth Adonis from his native rock ran purple to the sea, supposed with blood of Thammuz, yearly wounded. The love tale infected Sion's daughters with like heat, whose wanton passions in the sacred porch Ezekiel saw, when by the vision led his eye surveyed the dark idolatries of alienated Judah. Next came one who mourned in earnest when the captive ark maimed his brute image, head and hands lopped off his own temple on the Grunzel edge, where he fell flat and shamed his worshippers. Dagon his name, sea monster, upward man and downward fish, yet had his temple high reared in Azotus, dreaded through the coast of Palestine and Gath and Ascalon and Acheron and Gaza's frontier bounds. Him followed Rimmon, whose delightful seat was fair Damascus on the fertile banks of Abana, far, lucid streams. He also against the house of God was bold, a leper once he lost and gained a king. Ahaz, his sotish conqueror, whom he drew God's altar to disparage and displace for one of his Syrian mode, whereon to burn his odious offerings and adore the gods whom he had vanquished. After these appeared a crew who under names of old renown, Osiris, Isis, Horus, and their train, with monstrous shapes and sorceries abused fanatic Egypt and her priests to seek their wandering gods, disguised in brutish forms rather than human. Nor did Israel escape the infection when their borrowed god composed the calf in Oreb, and rebel king doubled the sin in Bethel and in Dan, likening his maker to the grazed ox. Jehovah, who in one night when he passed from Egypt marking equaled with one stroke both her firstborn and all her bleeding gods, Belial, came last, than whom a spirit more lewd fell not from heaven, or more gross to love vice for itself. To him no temple stood, or altar smoked, yet who more oft than he in temples and at altars, when the priest turns atheist, as did Eli's sons, who filled with lust and violence the house of God. In courts and palaces he also reigns, and in luxurious cities where the noise of riot ascends above their loftiest towers, and injury and outrage, and when night darkens the streets, then wander forth the sons of Belial flown with insolence and wine, witness the streets of Sodom, and that night in Gibeah, when the hospitable door exposed a matron to avoid worse rape. These were the prime in order and in might, the rest were long to tell, though far renowned, the Ionian gods of Javans, issue held gods yet contest later than heaven and earth. Their boasted parents Titan, heaven's firstborn, with his enormous brood and birthright seized by younger Saturn. He was from mightier Jove, his own, and Rhea's son, like measure found. So Jove, usurping reigned, these first in Crete and Ida known. Thence on the snowy top of cold Olympus ruled the middle air, their highest heaven, or on the Delphian cliff, or in Dodona, and through all the hounds of Doric land, through all the bounds of Doric land, or whom with Saturn old fled after Adria to the Hesperian fields, and o'er the Celtic roamed the utmost isles. All these and more came flocking, but with looks downcast and damp, yet such wherein appeared obscure some glimpse of joy to have found their chief, not in despair, to have found themselves not lost in loss itself, which on his countenance cast like doubtful hue, but he his wonted pride soon recollecting with high words that bore semblance of worth, not substance, gently raised their fainting courage and dispelled their fears. Then straight commands that on warlike sound, that the warlike sound of trumpets loud and clarions be upreared, his mighty standard, the proud honor claimed as own, as his right, a cherub tall, and forthwith with the glittering staff unfurled, the imperial ensign, full high advance, shone like a meteor, streaming to the wind with gems and golden luster, rich in blaze, seraphic arms and trophies, all the while sonorous metal blowing martial sounds, at which the universal host upsent a shout that tore hell's concave, and beyond frighted the reign of chaos and old night. All in a moment, through the gloom, were seen 10,000 banners rise into the air with orient colors waving, and with them rose a forest huge of spears, and thronging helms appeared, and serried shields, and thick array of depth immeasurable. Anon they move in perfect phalanx to the Dorian mood, of flutes, and soft recorders such as raise to height the noblest temper heroes old arming to battle, and instead of rage deliberate valor breathed firm and unmoved with dread of death to flight or foul retreat, nor wanting power to mitigate this assuage with solemn touches troubled thoughts, and chase anguish and doubt and fear, and sorrow and pain from mortal or immortal minds. Thus they, breathing united force with fixed thought, moved on in silence to soft pipes, and charmed their painful steps o'er the burnt soil. And now advanced in view, they stand horrid front of dreadful length, and dazzling arms and guise of warriors old, with ordered spear and shield awaiting what command their mighty chief had to impose. He through the armed files darts his experienced eye, and soon traverse the whole battalion, views their order due, their visages and statures of gods, their number last he sums, and now his heart distends with pride and hardening, and his strength glories, for never since created man much met such embodied force as named with these could merit more than that small infantry warred on by cranes, though all the giant brood of Phalegra with heroic race were joined that fought on Thebes and Ilium, on each side mixed with auxiliar gods, and what resounds in fable or romance of Uther's son, begirt in British and Armoric knights, and all who since baptized or infidel jousted in Aspermont, Montauban, Damasco, or Morocco, or Trebizond, or whom Biserta sent from Afric shore when Charlemagne with all his peerage fell by Fontarabia. Man, I was so close to making through that part without fucking stumbling too bad. Pardon my French. Thus far, these beyond compare, or mortal prowess, yet observed their dread commander. He above the rest in shape and gesture proudly eminent, stood like a tower, his form, and yet not lost all her original brightness, nor appeared less than archangel ruined, the excess of glory obscured, as when the sun new risen looks through the horizontal misty air shorn of his beams, or from behind the moon in dim eclipse disastrous twilight sheds on half the nations, and with fear of change perplexes monarchs. Dark and so, yet shone above them all the archangel, but his face deep scars of thunder, and entrenched in care sat on his faded cheek, but under brows of dauntless courage and considerate pride, waiting revenge cruel his eye, but cast signs of remorse and passion to behold the fellows of his crime, the followers rather, for other once beheld in bliss condemned, For ever now to have their lot in pain, millions of spirits in their fault immersed, of heaven and from eternal splendors flung for his revolt, yet faithful how they stood, their glory withered, as when heaven's fire hath scathed the forest oaks, or mountain pines with singed top their stately growth through bare stands on the blasted heath. He now prepared to speak, whereat their doubled ranks they bend from wing to wing, and half enclose him round with all his peers' attention held them mute. Thrice he essayed, and thrice in spirit of scorn, tears such as angels weep burst forth, at last words interwove with sighs found out their way. You just see him like scanning like all of these dudes, standing amidst fire with no light but the embers, him looking back and forth in his crowd 3 times, Satan himself. O myriads of immortal spirits, O powers matchless, but with the Almighty, and that strife not with inglorious, though the event was dire, at this place testifies, and this dire change hateful to utter. But what power of mind foreseeing or presaging from the depth of knowledge past or present could have feared? How such united force of gods, how such as stood like these, could ever know repulse? For who can yet believe, though after loss all of these puissant legions whose exile hath emptied heaven shall fail to reascend self-raised and repossess their native seat? For me, be witness all the host of heaven, if counsels different or dangers shunned by me, have lost our hopes, but he who reigns monarch in heaven, till then as one secure sat on his throne, upheld by old repute, consent, or custom, and his regal state put forth at full, but still his strength concealed, which tempted our attempt and wrought our fall. Henceforth his might we know, and know our own, so as not either to provoke or dread new war provoked. Our better part remains to work in close design, by fraud or guile, what force effected not, that he no less at length from us may find, who overcomes by force hath overcome but half his foe. Space may produce new worlds, whereof so rife that went of fame in heaven, that he ere long intended to create, and therein plant a generation whom his choice regard should favor equal to his sons of heaven. Thither, if but to pry, shall be perhaps our first eruption, thither or elsewhere, for this infernal pit shall never hold celestial spirits in bondage, nor the abyss long under darkness cover. But these thoughts full counsel must mature. Peace is despaired, for who can think submission? War then, war open or understood must be resolved. He spake, and to confirm his words, out flew millions of flaming swords, drawn from the thighs of mighty cherubim, and sudden blaze far round, illumined hell. Highly they raged against the highest, and fierce with grasp of arms clashed on their sounding shields the din of war, hurling defiance toward the vault of heaven. There stood a hill not far from whose grisly top belched fire and rolling smoke. The rest entire shone with a glossy scurf, undoubted sign that in his womb was hid metallic ore, the work of sulphur. Thither, winged with speed, a numerous brigade hastened, as when bands of pioneers with spade and pickaxe armed forerun the royal camp to trench a field or cast a rampart. Mammon led them on. Mammon, the least erected spirit that fell from heaven. For even in heaven his looks and thoughts were always downward bent, admiring more the riches of heaven's payment trodden gold than aught divine, or wholly else enjoyed in vision beatific. By him first men also, and by his suggestion taught, ransacked the centre, and with impious hands rifled the bowels of their mother earth for treasures better hid. Soon had his crew opened into the hill a spacious wound, and digged out ribs of gold. Let none admire that riches grow in hell, that soil may best deserve the precious bane, and here let those of Babel and works of Memphian kings learn how their greatest monuments of fame and strength of art are easily outdone by spirits reprobate, and in an hour what in an age they with incessant toil and hands innumerable scarce perform, nigh on the plain and many cells prepared, that underneath had veins of liquid fire, sluiced from the lake a sancet multitude, with wondrous art founded the massy ore, severing each kind and scummed the bullion dross. A third as soon had formed within the ground a various mould, and from the boiling cells, by strange conveyance filled each hollow nook, as in an organ from one blast, and wind to many a row of pipes, and soundboard breathes. On, out of the earth a fabric huge rose like an exhalation, with the sound of dulcet symphonies and voices sweet, built like a temple where pilasters round were set, and Doric pillars overlaid with golden architrave. Nor did there want cornice or phrase, or bossy sculptures graven the roof was fretted gold, not Babylon, nor great El Cairo, such magnificence equalled in all their glories to enshrine Belus or Serapis, their gods, or seat their kings, when Egypt with Assyria strove in wealth and luxury. The ascending pile stood, fixed their stately height, and straight the doors opening their brazen folds discover wide within her ample spaces o'er the smooth and level pavement from the arched roof pendant by subtle magic many a row of starry lamps and blazing cressets fed with naphtha and asphaltus yielded light as from a sky. The hasty multitude admiring entered, and the works some praise and some the architect. His hand was known in heaven by many a towered structure high, where sceptred angels had held their residence, and sat as princes, whom the supreme king exalted to such power and gave to rule, each in his hierarchy the orders bright, nor was his name unheard or unadored in ancient Greece, and in Ausonian land men called him Mulciber. And how he fell from heaven, and they fabled, thrown by angry Jove sheer o'er the crystal battlements. From the morn to noon he fell, from noon to dewy eve. A summer's day, and with the setting sun dropped from the zenith like a falling star on Lemnos, the Aegean isle. Thus they relate, erring, for he, with his rebellious rout, fell long there, nor aught availed him now to have built in heaven high towers, nor did he escape by all his engines, but was headlong sent with his industrious crew to build in hell. Meanwhile the winged heralds by command of sovereign power and awful ceremony, and trumpets sound throughout the host proclaim a solemn council forthwith to be held at Pandemonium, the high capital of Satan and his peers. Their summons called from every band and squared regiment, by place of choice the worthiest. They anon with hundreds and with thousands trooping came, attended. All access was thronged, the gates and porches wide, but chief the spacious hall, though like a covered field, where champions, though like a covered field, where champions bold wont ride and armed, and in the Soldan's chair defied the best of Paynim, chivalry to mortal combat, or career with lance. Thick swarmed, both on the ground and in the air, brushed with hiss of rustling wings, as bees in springtime when the sun with Taurus rise, pour forth their populous youth about the hive in clusters. They among fresh dews and flowers fly to and fro, or on the smooth plank, the suburb of their straw-built citadel, new rubbed with balm, and expatiate and confer their state affairs. So thick the airy crowd swarmed and were straitened, till the signal given, behold a wonder! They but now, who seemed in bigness to surpass Earth's giant sons, now less than smallest dwarfs in a narrow room, throng numberless, like the Pygmean race beyond the Indian mount, or fairy elves whose midnight revels by a forest side, or fountain some belated peasant sees, or dreams he sees, while overhead the moon sits arbitress, and nearer to the earth wheels her pale course. They on the mirth and dance intent, with jocund music charm his ear. At once with joy and fear his heart rebounds. Thus incorporeal spirits to smallest forms reduce their shapes immense, and were at large, though with number still amidst the hall of that infernal court, but far within, and in their own dimensions, like themselves, the great seraphic lords and cherubim. In close recess and secret conclave sat 1,000 demigods on golden seats, frequent and full. After short silence, then and summons read. After short silence, then and summons read, the great consult began. I guess we'll do the great consult in book 2. So I mean, it sure as hell sounds like Like the great conclave of demons built something down in hell after being kicked out of heaven. But better to reign in hell than serve in heaven.